In this episode, Golden, David Raiklen, and I discuss Foundation, Season 1. Full speed ahead.
The Omega Beam. Full power. The Omega Beam.
Welcome to the Omega Beam number 151. I'm your host, Oren Merton. Isaac Asimov's Foundation books are without a doubt classic science fiction works. So vast in scope, it was often considered unfilmable. Well, here we are in 2021, and Season 1 of Foundation is now streaming in its entirety on Apple TV+. We are joined by our frequent guest, David Raiklen, to really put this series through its paces and give it a long discussion, along with our daughter, who decided to make herself known every now and again. We start spoiler-free, and then the spoilers come fast and furious. So let's get to it. I am here with Golden and friend of the show, David Raiklen. Welcome back, David.
I feel happy to be here. It's going to be a great show.
Excellent. We are also here with our daughter, Shira, who you may hear every now and again.
Providing some random, indecipherable commentary.
The best commentary sometimes is
correct,
indecipherable.
isn't it? Yeah.
So we're here to talk about the Season 1.
And mic grabs.
And mic grabs. Season 1 of Foundation, which is now streaming in its entirety on Apple TV+. So neither Golden nor I have read the Foundation books, even though they are, dare I say it, foundational in science fiction.
I started one.
You started one. So you've started one more than I have. David, what is your association with the books?
Well, I actually had a chance to read them when I was a kid. And then some years after that, Asimov came out with a whole series of new books that are set in the Foundation timeline. So I got to read those. And then a few years after that, he came up with Crossover, where he took the Foundation series and his equally famous Robot series and combined those, and I read those. So I can say that there are bits of all three of those in the show we're going to talk about.
Excellent. So Golden and I can certainly look at this with the history of our science fiction, both television and film watching and just books we have read, but you can also add to that with a knowledge of Asimov itself. So I'd like to start sort of spoiler-free, although the truth is that sounds kind of silly when we're talking about books that were written so long ago. But
No, I don't think it is, because from the feedback that I've heard from people that have read it, this isn't a true adaptation.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to talk about. I guess we could talk about it at this point.
So, I mean, there's going to be spoilers. I think that we can start spoiler-free for like a couple minutes, but
Right, there's no point.
I mean, It's absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I really got hooked into the different stories that are taking place and the characters and wanting to see what was going to happen to them. And although I could draw some guesses as to what was going to happen, a lot of it was just fun to watch unfold.
Okay.
There's my spoiler free.
Excellent.
There we go.
I will just add to your spoiler free that not knowing anything about the characters, the books, the story, I came in totally cold. And I would just add that I found it a slow burn in the sense that I didn't even know who the characters were for like the first 3 episodes. I didn't necessarily get the timeline for the first couple.
Well, you had a Witcher episode. You had a Witcher moment.
Right, where I was like, wait, we're in the past now? What's going on?
No, it was never the past.
I will say that once I got into the swing of the way that the show was going, then I would agree that I enjoyed it.
It's a lovely production. Mm-hmm. The cinematography, the production design, the costumes, the visual effects, everything is done beautifully, and it's pleasant just to watch it because it's science fiction, if you know what I'm saying. It's not
that's
dark
exactly
and gritty.
what I
It's
was
actually
saying.
very bright and colorful.
I was actually commenting when we were watching, or we had finished watching Dune, that Dune is also just a gorgeous movie. But I really just was enjoying how beautiful Foundation was.
Yeah, I think you both said it in a really interesting way because, and I agree with you because I think for a very long time, Ridley Scott's or Blade Runner, pre Blade Runner 2049, just the original 80s Blade Runner, I think in a lot of ways that aesthetic kind of became the science fiction aesthetic for a long time. Everything, if you wanted your sci-fi to be, realistic, quote unquote, it had to be dark and gritty. It had to be night, 24 hours a day. And, it had to be all that. And this is a very bright and a very, I don't want to say optimistic because it's not, but it's bright and colorful. It has a full palette as opposed to the Blade Runner palette of that goes from kind of charcoal to black.
Yes. Well, just going to the contrast, the Dune has unsaturated colors. In that way, it's kind of like the Snyder Cut of Justice League,
right?
Where they're going, from dark. How can you get darker than dark? Unsaturated. So Foundation goes in the other direction. And there's also a hopefulness to it that's kind of peeking out from the grimness. And that is definitely Asimov, where it's a more positive, hopeful vision of the future that even though bad stuff is happening and you're told very clearly that even worse stuff is going to happen, that there's a sense that there is going to be a happy ending and a resolution to all of this. And that's definitely from Asimov.
Excellent. All right. So I think we can end our spoiler-free section. I think we pretty much summed it up.
One more spoiler-free thing that if you haven't seen it yet, the story does unfold at, let's say, a leisurely pace.
Yeah.
And while some things do happen very quickly and it can be very action-packed and exciting, that it's okay if you're not quite following it the first couple of 3 episodes. That's just the pace that they're going at. Eventually, almost everything gets explained.
No, I found that too.
It's kind of like the storyline starts together. Then it diverges, and you're kind of waiting to see if it will come back.
And it more or less does. So it's not like Lost or something like that where, they don't have a plan. They do have a plan. In fact, that's sort of the central concept of the whole thing is that there is a plan.
There's a plan. Stick to the plan.
There's
Follow
a plan.
The plan.
It's
Believe
just
in the plan.
Who really knows the plan.
Right. Who's been entrusted with the plan becomes an issue. All right, so I think if you haven't seen it and that sounds interesting to you, then you can go see it. And for the rest of us who already have, let's get spoilerific.
Yes. Okay, well, let me just start out by saying that what we are experiencing is David S. Goyer's Foundation.
Okay.
It's about 1/3 Asimov. It's about 1/3 things that they borrowed from other science fiction stuff, and then 1/3 is stuff that the writers
and that's
on that
great.
show came up with.
It's instead inspired by, kind of. And I like that. I like that it doesn't have to be a direct, we're just going to take that story and put it on paper. We're going to actually reimagine what this looks like.
Yeah. It's always interesting when
we're not doing that either.
It's always interesting when people adapt things because it is usually different. And I always am wondering, is it because they just wanted it to be different? Is it some kind of studio meddling? I'm guessing in this place it's not so much studio meddling. Is it that they have a different idea and that's what they want the show to be? Is it instead that they couldn't film it in some way, that they didn't feel the original is as filmable, as cinematic, as interesting, visually, even if it's great textually?
Well, let me see if I can kind of summarize a little bit about that and give you some insight. Okay, the books are written from the perspective of these are all things that happened in our future, but they happened in the past from the narrator's point of view. So all of this is super futuristic, super high tech, but to the people who are telling you the story, this is old fashioned. And that lends a very different kind of tone to it because you know that things are going to turn out okay because there's a super advanced civilization that's telling you about this.
Right. This is their history.
Yeah, this is their history that they're telling about. So that's part of it. And also, this is really important if you're considering reading the books, which are really classic. And just the style and the sense of a future history was invented in these books. In other words, the idea that you could plot out an alternative history line and have everything be consistent in your alternative universe was basically invented by Isaac Asimov in these foundation stories. And so it's really important, in addition to being really entertaining. I mean, it was voted the best science fiction series of all time by the Hugo Awards, which are the fan awards.
Yeah.
So, the fans are not going to vote for something because it's good for you. They're going to vote for it because it's actually entertaining. And Asimov's foundation, everything is very logical and it makes sense. Even when people are acting crazy, you understand why they're acting crazy because of the pressures that are put on them. And the David S. Goyer Foundation TV series, a lot of it doesn't really make sense and it doesn't really hang together. That's their choice.
Right. They're trying to make
Like,
a modern
for example,
drama
what?
type thing.
For example, what do you feel doesn't make sense?
Okay, like the genetic dynasty thing. At first, it doesn't really make sense. Why would people want to follow a genetic dynasty? It doesn't, make sense that people would, for thousands of years, just assume that they had to be ruled by clones of the same emperor from thousands of years ago. And then at the end, it turns out that isn't what they were really doing, that mutations were being secretly introduced in there without the genetic dynasty knowing about it. So, if they're so concerned about it being a perfect genetic dynasty and everybody's a perfect clone and they're not, wouldn't they have noticed that thousands of years ago?
You'd think so. Is that a
Well, not
David S.
if
Goyer
they're
thing?
doing.
Yeah, so that's a Davis S. Goyer thing.
So
Or
the genetic
someone else.
dynasty is not part of Asimov's foundation.
No, it's not. But many of the characters are. I mean, what they're keeping is things like the sense that no empire can last forever. And no matter how powerful the technology, and no matter how hard they try and keep everybody under control, things do eventually spiral out of control, and the empire does eventually fall. And what Asimov is doing is saying that, okay, since we know that happens, suppose some really smart scientists tried to figure out how to cushion the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So we know it's going to fall, but let's use psychology and history and our ability to predict things, doing computer modeling. And it's also interesting that way. It's a very early example of people using computer modeling to predict the future. And by doing that, sort of stave off the worst things that might happen by understanding that this is where things could really go bad and shift history at these turning points. So, things get worse, but they don't go down that pathway.
Right, they don't get as bad as they could be.
Right. So the idea is that instead of things falling into chaos and having 1,000 years of people suffering, that, we can trim this down to just a few centuries that it takes to dismantle the old empire.
Yeah. And to give the series credit, I think even in the first episode, it was made fairly clear that's what Harry wanted.
Yes.
That he in the court trial, he basically, they say, well, what would you do? And he says, well, let's get rid of the genetic dynasty as a way to cushion the fall. So I think that I give them credit. They did make that pretty clear.
And that scene, that scene is actually pretty close to being the same as in the book. Now, I didn't remember it in enough detail, but there are lots of Asimov fans out there, and they have confirmed.
So instead of the genetic dynasty, who was it? Who was the power?
Well, it was a dynastic empire, but they weren't clones.
Okay.
Right. It's just like kind of like the Roman Empire. They just had kids and stuff like that.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of want, they wanted obviously to use the genetic dynasty for some of the drama with the whole, is the line pure and this and that, and going to the religious planet where do you have a soul or not if you're the same thing.
Right.
But,
Yes, they actually prove that he doesn't have a soul.
Right. And the thing is that's not necessary for the story. I mean, that's the story they wanted to tell.
It was interesting because at that point I thought, well, maybe if Dawn had gone, knowing that he has these defects, maybe Dawn had a soul.
Yes.
But yet you find out that it's not just Dawn that has
It's everybody.
genetic defects.
Right.
Day also does. So
And that did make for really good drama because we find out that the person who was most fanatical about genetic purity was actually impure.
Yeah,
well, that and I was talking with Orrin about this when it was happening. Is that I had a feeling that he somehow concocted a story, or we had a feeling, and as soon as and then they laid out, oh yeah, this is how he was able to do it. And it was just very moving when she goes and she has to kill the other. And
Desmazel, the robot human.
yeah, when she has to kill the other lady, it's very civil, and the other person really she's like, I don't know, I'm dead anyway. It's just, when is it going to happen? And she's like, no, it's already happened. And
right, there's a lot of that going on, where the balance between things that are like fate and set in stone and cannot be changed, and people who are saying, wait a second,
and then
all of this can be changed.
I mean, she does promise Day, because he's very afraid that they're going to kill him, and she promises him that she will not let them kill him.
Yes.
And she does it herself.
Right, which again doesn't make sense.
Because then
it's a robot.
But
she would know what she can and cannot do.
Right.
No, it's the Empire. She's still for the Empire. And her decision is based on the Empire. And she said, I will not let them kill you. Doing it herself, she has kept her promise.
Yes. And, you see her screaming in agony because she didn't want to do it. So this is, again, something that really doesn't make sense. I know that they're trying to make it make sense, but it doesn't. Because if she knows that she's loyal to the Empire and she promises him that she's going to not let them kill her, then why is she so unhappy? I mean, she tears her face off. She's
right.
so unhappy.
Because she does have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
And yet these rules are imposed upon her. So she cannot actually take a lot of actions that are from herself. She has to do what she's programmed to do. And I think internally she's fighting that. Or she just doesn't like it.
Again, the robot was not in this part of the Foundation timeline. So, that's something that they brought forward from the later Foundation books when they crossed it over with the robots.
So one of the things that's interesting is, you brought up that she's loyal to the concept of Empire more than any single clone life in the Empire. Well, if they're all corrupt, does that mean she can now just go willy-nilly slaughtering all of them?
Exactly.
Moreover, if you're Day and you're the main emperor who has the main say, and now you know that your helper is free and clear to kill you all because you're a mutant too, does that mean you kill your robot?
I don't think that's
I think that robot would
preserve
be
the Empire.
Extraordinarily difficult to kill.
I mean, I also think that maybe that's why she's tearing her face off, is that she is at odds with her programming now. Because she no longer has a clear set program. And how do you protect the Empire when the Empire is already
falling apart?
It's already falling apart. There are already fractures.
Well, obviously she needs to go find the Foundation and help them survive. Yeah, I don't know. But it is interesting, and they did make an interesting show. I'm curious to see where it's going to go, specifically in the sense that I have to admit, and I told Golden this, I was never wowed by the story of the emperors as characters. I never felt a lot of sympathy for the emperors, and I don't think we're supposed to. I think that's the story they wanted to tell, that we're not supposed to feel a ton of sympathy for them. So I don't necessarily care what happens to the Empire, but I think we do care about some of the other characters. Salden, is that her name?
Selver Hardin?
Selver Hardin and her mom, Gail. I think we care about them. Mm-hmm. I think they made some of the ancillary characters, like Hugo, very sympathetic.
If you think about the last time that Salvor and Hugo see each other, just the relationship that they have, she's running away. And he knows that this is what she has to do, but yet it's not about forgiving her or anything else. He loves her and she loves him, and they both just understand each other. And I think that that's really just awesome.
Yeah, I think some of the character relationships, like you said, they were pretty good. I think the relationship between Harry and Gail, though it was obviously fraught, was also just well played and interesting
it was
to watch.
Just, hey, look, I'm going to bring this young woman here, and she's going to leave her home world and leave everything she knows, and I'm going to promise her everything. And now she's facing death.
Well,
welcome to the planet.
And we find out that one of the reasons she was so interested in leaving is because she basically knew her own planet was doomed, that it was going to flood, and she was living on an anti-science planet.
No one was believing her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, there was no future where she was. She went to where she thought there was a future, and surprise!
Yes. Well, first,
and yet she still wants to go home.
First, Liu Yobei, I think that's how you pronounce her name, is a very smart and attractive actress. Mm-hmm. But clearly the producers have decided that they want her to play somebody who is very kind of rough and emotionally hyperactive and has all these qualities that are incompatible with being a mathematical prodigy. And while I like their relationship, I found the way that the character was written really hard to believe, because I've met mathematical prodigies, and they are not hyper-emotional people. They're the opposite. They're very controlled and calm because they're always thinking really hard about really complicated things. It's just the nature of that kind of math that your head has to be in the clouds all the time, because if you break your concentration, you lose this long chain of thought.
I think there was something about that where it wasn't just that she was a mathematical prodigy. It was that there was something that she could see within other things.
Right, like, but she was also kind of a psychic.
Yeah, and I think that kind of takes it away from just being a mathematical prodigy, that there's more going on, and she doesn't know where these visions or things are coming from.
I'm assuming,
and that's also what helped her to solve the riddle.
Yeah, I'm assuming the psychicness is a David S. Goyer invention and not...
Well, actually, the Foundation trilogy has some amazing concepts that get introduced completely out of left field. So just when you think that you finally understand this universe, he brings a whole new set of concepts into the universe that blows that apart. And everything still fits together, but now it's a completely different puzzle than the one that you thought you were putting together.
Which I kind of feel is what they keep doing with the series. Because you thought that you knew what Harry's plan was, and then it's not quite that.
Oh, and Jared Harris, the actor who's playing Harry Seldon, he really is a spot-on incarnation of the book version of Harry Seldon in many ways.
He's a good actor. I've seen in a whole lot of things, yeah.
Now, he's also, a little bit more talkative and extroverted because, again, Asimov tried to write his mathematicians like real mathematicians would be and real scientists. But, if you add that, okay, maybe he's more of a popularizer.
Right.
and a little more extroverted, that he is actually really close to the book version of Harry Seldon. And in the books, that's critical because it's his personality and his vision that keeps coming back in ways that are both predictable because he's going to come back, but unpredictable because the circumstances that he comes back in are different every time.
Yeah, interesting. So talking a little bit more about the show itself, the physical show, we've talked about the visual effects. The effects are stunning. They clearly...
Sometimes they're like just works of art.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly, however, I don't know how much money each episode cost, but you can see it on the screen.
I'm guessing it's, Game of Thrones territory.
Yeah, I'm sure. I will say, though, that one of my favorite composers did the music, but the music was relatively forgettable.
Well, okay. After even the first episode, I was saying, they have so many talented people and they have such big resources, but it feels like everybody is holding back, except for the actors in certain scenes where they go over the top. And that stayed with me through the whole thing. It really feels like everybody is being told to hold back and not push things as far as they could go. And what can I say? I mean, I'm still watching the show, but
Right.
it still feels to me like they're holding back and they're not, maybe they're leaving it more to do in the second and the third season.
Even with that, I felt like every single week, because we did watch it by the week, that I always wanted more, and I kept coming back to what happened, and my brain kept coming back to it through the week.
Yes.
And reflecting upon what had happened. And there aren't a lot of series that I do that with.
Right. Well, again, even though it's about a third Asimov, that's enough to give it this really compelling plot and these really intriguing characters. And even though the execution is diverging, there's still that core of ideas that are just really compelling. I mean, there's a reason why people thought that this was worth adapting, even though there were several failed attempts, because there's something really compelling about the story and about the characters that make you want to say, okay, let's see what I can do with this story.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that now, not necessarily by now, I don't mean this exact moment. I mean this era of television made sense for when to adapt it is, I think, prior to now, movies were movies, and you generally had to tell as close to a complete story as you could in 2 or so hours, or TV shows were more episodic, that you were supposed to be able to dip in and dip out any given week and enjoy that specific bottle story, and that was that. But now we have entered the era of serialized television where you can tell a very long-form visual story over many episodes and many seasons.
Yes.
So clearly a story like Foundation begs for that treatment.
Exactly. And I really think that we had to have Babylon 5 and we had to have Game of Thrones before we could have the Foundation adaptation, because there just wasn't the mindset or the technology to do it. It just, if you tried to do it as a movie, it would just not work because the story is way too big, and you couldn't do it on TV because the visual effects were too complex until now.
Yeah. And it helps when you have these major either studios or tech companies, take your pick, that are willing to sink ungodly amounts of money into these series.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm guesstimating that, they probably put $250 million into this first season.
And I appreciate the fact that people are looking at this and saying, hey, this would be great. No, this wouldn't be great as a movie. We need more time to tell this. Let's go ahead and make this a series.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it needs to be a series that has the production value of a feature film.
Right.
And we're in the era now where that's possible. So, but getting back to the actual series itself, there's also some gender bending. In other words, the original books had a lot of male characters, and many of those are now female characters. But that works fine because these were all made up names. So
Sure.
So which ones?
It could have been like Gail Dornick and Salvor Hardin, and the books were men, but they work perfectly fine as female characters as well. And there isn't much in the story that would make them have to be male or female, or they could be aliens, and the story would still work, because even though they're interesting characters, they're also pawns in this much bigger chess game. And so you get to be, in that sense, it's kind of like it's doing Game of Thrones one better, where, yes, you get to have all these major characters, and they all die off, but they die off of natural causes,
right,
because the story lasts so long.
The story goes for hundreds of years.
That they've lived their whole life and their whole story arc, and now it's time for a new set of characters.
That's where I think The Witcher messed him up, because they said 35 years or whatever, 30 some years later, and he's thinking, Okay, well that's there, but over there it's not. It hasn't been 30 years. Well, it had. So the timeline didn't really jump around; it just jumped forward.
Yeah.
And now we've
threw me a
jumped
bit.
forward at the end of this season. We've jumped forward 138 years. Was that
Something
what it
like
was?
that, yeah.
Yes. But, she went into the first sleeper cell for, I don't know, how was it?
Yeah.
30 years.
30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
she does another one. And I think this is just their way of trying to have continuity characters.
Yeah.
Because in TV, you need to have characters you can identify with. So they have to either, be able to live 1,000 years, or they have to go into suspended animation for
Sure.
And
a long time.
Harry's plan's going to take a long time.
Right.
Yeah, speaking of changing the characters' genders, I hadn't thought about that because obviously I hadn't read the book. But the very first episode I saw, I did immediately think when we started seeing a totally diverse cast that, oh, this is Goyer because I'm guessing in the 1950s, it simply was just assumed that everybody was white. It wasn't a thing. It was just, we're all white people who are in science fiction, reading science fiction.
Yeah, and I love the diverse cast.
Yeah.
In other words, the things that bother me about it aren't the actors and or the casting. It's they're supposed to be like scientists, but they don't act like any scientists that we've ever seen. And it's hard to imagine how they could do their job as a scientist and have that kind of personality.
Well, they have
The
personalities
bureaucrats,
meant
though,
for
and all
TV.
that, the emperor and the military people and all that, those are all very well cast. It's just the scientists are not like any scientists that could probably exist in the real world. So, that's not that big a deal. But let's go back to something that, the kind of inciting incident is when the rebels
Blow up the space dock.
The space elevator.
Space elevator, yeah.
And that's not exactly the way it was in the book because they hadn't, invented the idea of space elevators when the books were written. But I thought that was a really cool idea that, that instead of having rocket ships, you just have an elevator to go up to your space station. So, that's a really cool upgrade to the books. And having the rival planets have to come together and fight a common enemy at the end, that I thought was very topical and very modern.
Y'all three were involved in the space elevator.
Yes.
Collapsing and creating the scar.
And for what it's worth, that also was in the books, that the idea that these people who were traditional enemies would now end up fighting on the same side, even though they were actively resisting trying to be on the same side. That the forces of history came down to individuals who changed their minds. And I thought that was pretty well played because, in episode 9 and 10, well, you see that the insurgents, or whatever you want to call them, the terrorists, are actually people. And they're not completely insane, that under the right circumstances, they can see, it actually does make sense for us to gang up and fight the Empire.
Right. Yeah, it did, and I thought it was a particularly good contrast between the Huntress and Salva. That Salva and
Salvor.
Salvor was able to change and basically say, "This is what we've got to do." The Huntress never was, and she wanted to basically just destroy the evidence that they were supposed to.
Well, she wanted to just destroy from the beginning,
right? And she couldn't grow. She couldn't evolve her thinking, and so she had to be removed from
those around her though.
She had to be removed from the equation.
Yeah, those around her could change.
Yeah.
So,
but she made an interesting, again, temporary antagonist, if that's the right word, or
right.
the antagonist of the era.
And she could, and like they said towards the end there, they respected each other. Salvor and the Huntress, they respected each other in their own strange way.
Right. In a way.
Yes, in a way. And it just turned out that Salvor's way was the way that things were actually going to turn out. That was the force of history.
And she was ready to pull the trigger when she needed to.
Right.
Or, draw the string.
Right. That at first she was just protecting her home planet, but through the experiences of being on the Invictus and seeing the the larger universe, her mind started to expand,
Right.
and she started to see that, wait a minute, this is about more than me and my people. This is about the whole galaxy, and the series did actually do a pretty good job of that. So hats off to them, because that's not an easy concept to get across. To show that someone who's fighting so hard for their own little community can actually have their mind expanded and realize, wait a minute, there's a bigger cause than just my community.
Salvor and her mother on planet, the one that raised her, have a conversation at one point about all the light. And I remember turning to Oren and saying, well, here's where I think that Salvor is Gail's daughter genetically. And here she's not admitting that there's a lie between them right now, or that she wasn't being completely transparent. Pun not intended. Transparent.
Yes. Well, I don't want to give anything away, but the psychic powers will continue
To play a part in the
play
story.
a part.
Okay.
But I mean, just the fact that she had that ability, that she had that feeling, I'm like, she's got to be genetically, because they were taking and harvesting genetic material from them on the ship. So I'm like, that's
I think what wasn't clear, it did become clear once we saw that both Gale and Salvor had this.
Yeah, they were having visions.
Yeah, had sort of premonitions. Yeah. I think it became clear they were connected. My question at that point was, did her mother choose to implant an embryo of Gale and Raish? Was that his name?
Yeah, Raish, I think, was the guy's name.
Or did she not know? And she thought it was her embryo, but oopsie.
Yeah, no, I was pretty sure that.
That's what I was wondering, if it was a just sort of happenstance, or if it was a choice. And she made it clear it was a choice. So, I thought that was interesting. Speaking of casting, I have never been the biggest fan of Lee Pace, but I thought he was good in this. I thought he had the right sort of personality and presence and demeanor to play that kind of emperor.
Yes, he did. In fact, I think that all three of the actors, the Dawn, Day, and Dusk.
Well, there actually were four.
Or four, yeah.
Because sometimes Day is or Dawn is a boy.
We saw Dawn as a wee little beastie in the first one.
Yeah, and I think the guy who's playing Day also plays Cleon the first.
Oh, the first. Okay.
Yeah, I read that somewhere, that when we have that flashback and we see the guy who's the progenitor of the genetic dynasty, that's him in makeup.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
So, and that was an interesting kind of dynamic to follow. And also, I like that there was a revolution brewing on, Trantor itself, that there were people that were actually doing a really good job of infiltrating the Empire and getting one of the emperors to be replaced by a clone that they had made.
And I love the whole colorblind, I'm going to paint birds on the wall and he's not going to really see it. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah. No, it was. There was a lot of little touches all throughout the episodes that were really well thought of. Mm-hmm. And this series, one of my sort of pet peeves in shows is when people do stupid things for stupid reasons. But I think they did a pretty good job here of, even when people are doing stupid things, making their reasoning relatively clear, so you knew they weren't just acting because they needed it for plot convenience.
Yes. Well, some of it was plot convenience to stretch things out over 10 episodes.
Well, yeah, but there's always that.
I mean,
it's still, I was okay with things that were created to hold our attention for a few episodes, and then they were resolved before the actual resolution of the season one.
Right, yeah.
I think Gail wanting to go home, even though if her prediction was correct, there really wasn't home to go to.
Right, that she didn't really...
It was a very interesting choice.
Yeah, that was an interesting choice. And again, a real psychohistorian would know that the home isn't there. They would know that the math showed that this was going to happen.
But
And they would just believe that because scientists believe in their own work.
She is emotional, like you said. And for her, it's like everyone's been telling her what to do. Everything that she's done since she's left her home world, she really doesn't feel like she's had control. And going home, maybe she then gets that control back.
But then the question is,
life.
if you're a scientist and you get to the planet and you see that it's gone, and you got there in basically a cryopod, do you just plan to die? I mean, what's the plan?
Well, she didn't know until she landed because the cryopod didn't tell her.
Right, but if you reasonably expect to find nothing but an ocean when you get there,
she was still hoping that she was wrong.
It's a lot to put your hope in.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, especially when story arc.
Okay, I don't feel like I need to punch holes in it. I just want to embrace what they did with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm just saying that the story that they are inspired by, everything does make sense, and there are no holes really to punch in it. It's really been thought out really carefully, and when people do irrational things, you can see why they're being irrational, and you can tell that, okay, this irrational person is trying to mess up the plan, but they have no chance of actually messing up the plan because the plan does make sense,
right?
And they're going to run into an immovable object. And, that's sort of what happens to these people. It's like the vault, where everybody's trying to assail the vault, and get into it, and they just can't because it's not the right time. And then when it is the right time, then it opens up and everything is clear. So there's no way to get around the plan. The plan is ready when it's ready. And I'm hoping that will continue through because that's kind of one of the things that makes it so compelling is that that when the time is right, the answer will be revealed. And the answer will make sense. And it fits with everything that came before. And you can try and figure it out. And sometimes you may be able to guess, like you were able to guess that, Gale and Salvor were related. You were able to guess that, and it made sense.
I have no idea how many seasons this show is intended to go for.
Oh, the source material could be stretched out for, 10 seasons without difficulty.
Yeah, so we'll see as it progresses.
I just want to enjoy it. I want to enjoy it. I don't need to overthink it. I just want to enjoy the beauty of it and the characters and it to tell me a fascinating story.
Yeah, I really felt it had a happy ending to it. That, yes, people died, but, the people do die. But that doesn't mean you can't have a happy ending.
And like he said, they do have probably equipment on the ship, or she has her little thing. Gail has that little thing to maybe communicate.
Right, her now 100-some-year-old GPS.
138-year-old.
138-year-old GPS, but it worked. So.
But it's not just hers that is 138 years old. Salvor's equipment is also probably that old.
Right, but hopefully between the two of them, they can salvage enough to, if not get off planet, at least communicate with those around and do what they need to do, get where they need to get.
Well, I wonder if her guy had like a way to track his ship.
Maybe it would be 100-some years old at this point, and someone would have to be listening on the other end because I'm sure he's gone.
Yes.
But yeah, they certainly laid out an interesting story, and like you said, it's a third Asimov. That sounds perfectly plausible to me, having never read it. David S. Goyer has written a lot of things, some of which I've liked a lot. Man of Steel is still one of my very favorite superhero movies. Mm-hmm. He's also written some things I have not liked as much. So I can see this going either way. I can see it continuing to be something I really love or kind of just losing it at a certain point. And I really hope it keeps going and becoming a really interesting story.
I think it will, because, again, they've only gone through a small amount of the story in the first book. And there's lots of books, so there's tons of story that they could keep spinning out and would all connect. And when they added that subplot with I'm not sure what to call her, the sort of futuristic horticulturist that's keeping the Emperor's garden.
Right, yeah.
And her character was really interesting, and we got to see her. And And that's not really much in the book, but they developed that and made it interesting. So there's different ways for them to hold our interest with new characters, with evolving characters, with borrowing ideas from other science fiction stories. I think they've really come up with a formula here that could continue to be really interesting for as many seasons as they want to take it, which probably will just depend on how long people want to watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
So if people have the patience to stay with it, and I've had the patience to stay with it, and so
I wish I had the time to watch it again.
Well, that is good praise. So wrapping it up, I think it's clear we all liked it.
Yes.
And it will be interesting to see where it goes from here. Well, thank you, David, for joining us. It was great having you again.
Yes, it was great to be here, and there's lots more good shows out there to follow, and
we will have you back again if as much as you would like to be back. Thank you, Golden.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the invite.
And that's it for this episode. You can find the show notes at theomegabeam.com/151. If you liked this episode, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Your reviews help people who like this stuff find our podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. Be good to yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you next time.
The Omega Beam. Full stop.